Hello and welcome back to the RC Racing TV build of the DeAgostini Model Space Kyosho Hummer H1 radio control truck. In this video we'll be assembling steps 9 and 10. So what we've got here, we'll start with number 9. We've got here is the bag for step 9. And it's very simple. Usually I kind of cut away from these, but don't really have to because there's not much in this bag. We basically have a little bit of hardware, some screws and whatnot. And some of these are for the shock that we'll be assembling in this step. So this is the major procedure for this step, step 9. This is for step 10, so we'll set that one aside as well. The first thing to do is, well, we'll set the shock aside for now, and we'll concentrate on what we have already done before, which is gluing the tire to the wheel. Very, very simple. If you go back to video number 2 of this series, you'll see that, well, you'll see basically how to do it. Okay, so that is the tire glued and assembled, or assembled and then glued. Basically, as long as it looks the same as the first one that you did, you're all good. So this is the first one that we did in step 3. This one looks a little bit neater. I'm getting my practice back. Yeah, so it just takes a few minutes, and now we're just going to move on to assembling the shock. So the other thing that came in the bag with the tire was this shock oil, which is this stuff right here. It's just a general oil. Doesn't say silicone on it, so if it's silicone, I'll be a little bit surprised. And we've got the other parts from an earlier step here. This is an assembly tool. This isn't actually a part of the shock. This we'll be putting some of the O-ring and some pieces on there and pushing them into this aluminum cap here. So that's what that is for. This is the shock body and the cap. Now, if you're familiar with RC stuff, you'll note that there is no separate shock cap on this. Most RC, like racing buggies and trucks and stuff like that, have a shock body that's threaded at both ends, just like this one, but there's another set of threads on the other end. But to make this more realistic, it looks like Kyosho have gone with a one-piece shock body. And a lot of these pieces, like these O-rings here and these washers and the screws, there is a shock piston as well. And this is that's the shock shaft, and that will be going through this piece here. And then we've got the eyelet that will go on the end of the shock shaft, and then the shock spring that will fit right on all over that. So basically we need to make sure that we get this assembled correctly, because these instructions will basically form the rest of the way that you build the rest of the other 3 shocks that are included with all the parts. So if we do this correctly, will be all fine. Now, if you look through the instructions, you'll see that they ask you to just trim the shock piston, which is this piece here. It's got a large hole in it, and then 2 very, very small holes. You can see the oil basically passes through that, the 2 small holes, while see, it'll fit like that. So if you can imagine, this is inside the shock shaft, and as the tires are hitting bumps and things like that, this will be going up and down, and the oil this stuff right here, will be flowing up and down through those shock piston holes. So that's just to give you an idea of how the shock works. So the instructions tell you to have a look and make sure that there's no bits that hang off the edge of the piston. Now on this particular one, we got a little bit lucky where we don't actually have to, there's nothing that's actually hanging over the edge except this tiny little piece there, which you can maybe just see. So I don't need to actually cut it off. I can use this file just to shave it down a bit, and that sorts that. So now we're going to get everything we need ready to assemble the shock, and we'll be right back. Okay, so we've got all the shock parts laid out. We've also got a pair of pliers here, which we'll be needing to assemble everything on the shock shaft. We've got an old rag here, which is just a cut up old shirt, and that's basically there to not only wipe up spills of oil, which will happen, but also to protect the shock shaft from scratches from the pliers. So the first thing we need to do, just looking at the instructions, is to get a bit of this cloth and wrap it around the shock shaft on this side here. Now you can see that there's a short bit of threaded section there, and then a flat piece that's machined down from the rest of the shock shaft. And then there's this long piece of threaded area, and that's where we're going to be gripping the shock shaft. So we're just going to hold this in place. Now there are specialist RC tools that you can use, but you know, pair of needle nose or slip joint pliers will be fine. Now I do have another rag here just in case I do need to wipe up anything. So the first thing that's going on this, and we're only going to be working on this end here. So we've got this very small washer. Now if you look at this, we've got two of these. One side is slightly more rounded. You can see that side is a little bit more rounded. And the other side, it's because these are stamped out of sheet metal, very thin sheet metal. It doesn't really matter which way you put these in, but just so you're aware, there's sort of one side that's more flat than the other. And then the next thing we're going to do is put the shock piston on there, and it fits on there nice and smoothly. And then we're going to put the other shock shaft, or the washer, which is, they're difficult to pick up, but if you have you can probably pick it up just with the moisture on the tip of your finger. And then we're going to hold that in place. You can see we've got washer, shock piston, and washer again. And then we're going to use the 5.5 mil nut. We've got another pair of pliers to tighten it on, so you can see how much threaded rod is sticking out. Okay, so now we're just going to set that aside. Now we're going to get this little star washer. I'm not sure the actual technical name of this, but star washer here. And you can see, if you look carefully, you can see it's got sort of an angle to it. If that will focus. It kind of curves up a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that down so that it's facing up, and if I use the tool, you can press down on it and it will bend up quite a lot. So we've got the shock assembly rod here, and we're basically just going to put that on there so you can see how that goes. And then we've got the two of the 3 mil O-rings. Those will go there. And now we're just going to crack open the shock oil bottle. And just put just a drop of oil. Oop, that's way too much. But that's why we have the rag handy. Trying to watch it on the screen, and of course got it all over everything. But a little bit that you have to wipe up is better than not enough. And now we're going to get the shock cap, or the bottom of the shock body, and press it into place inside. And we're making sure that it doesn't come out of the end. So it's flush with the end. And according to the instructions, yep, when you pull out the assembly tool, you can see that that star washer is securely holding the O-rings in place. Right, so that is your seal to keep out all the dirt and dust and water and gunk and stuff like that that's out there. That's going to get all over the shocks. So those two O-rings are very important. So you can just use your fingers like I did, or do it as the instructions say by having put the flat end down and then press down like that. So either way is fine, as long as you don't press too hard, and you need to make sure all those little arms of the washer are inside that lip. Okay, so now we get our rag again, and put another couple drops inside there, just to make sure that there's plenty of oil inside that little area. I'm just going to put that over either a piece of plastic or a rag in this case, just to make sure the oil doesn't get anywhere else. And now we're going to take our assembled shock shaft and piston. Now if you want to be extra careful, you can put some just a drop of oil on the end of the threads, because that is metal. Those are, basically screw threads. You don't want those messing up the O-rings. They are silicone, so it'll kind of slide over the threads, but just to be extra careful. So now we're pushing that through. As long as it doesn't catch on anything, there will be a little bit of resistance. You'll feel a bit of like a bzz, sort of feel to it as it goes through the O-rings, but overall this is fine. So there we are. That's our assembly so far. And now we're going to get the rag again, or tissue paper as used in the instructions. Either is fine. So we're going to push this all the way through and hold that with a nice fat piece of the pliers. If you use locking pliers, just be very careful how tight you make them. And now we're going to screw this on all the way, just using our fingers. It's a bit tedious, but we're only doing one at the moment. It goes on nice and easy, and if it slips inside those pliers, you will be able to feel it with the hand that's holding the pliers. Now just watching carefully to make sure that the end of the thread doesn't disappear inside the ball end, the rod end. I'm just going to give it another half a turn or so. There, so now if you see inside there, it's nice and there's not too much there. Now in the instructions they show using a pair of calipers to measure exactly 14 millimeters between the cap and the end of the shock rod, or the the rod end. Okay, so we've got the shock shaft assembled now, and don't have a pair of calipers at hand, but if we use this here, you can see that we're just about 15 millimeters, which is almost where we need to be. The instructions do show using a pair of calipers to measure the distance, but don't have them handy. So we're just going to go a half a turn at a time and just show how to get the right measurement done, because not everybody has a pair of calipers. So. And one thing you can do is, when you're holding it, if you're not sure whether it's slipping or not, if you see the screw on the inside turning as you are tightening the rod end in place, then you know the shock shaft is just slipping just a bit. So let's say we're pretty close. I think it might just be turning. You might need to turn it maybe a full turn instead of a half a turn. And just really just grip down. So there we are. That's 14 millimeters. Alright, so now at least we can carry on with the rest of the shock build. And we're going to use the large, thin O-ring and kind of just pass it over the shock piston, and it'll just rest in place, if you can see in the bottom there. Okay, and what that does is it's just basically another seal that's going to sit around the edge of the end of the shock body. And now we're going to temporarily assemble these, and you'll notice I'm not turning the correct way just yet. I need to find the end of the plastic thread on the shock body. So basically just turn it counterclockwise until you feel the threads there kind of click into place, and then just gently thread those on, thread the cap on. And now you can pull the shock shaft out a bit. And if you're very careful, you can see this side of the rod end, the shock end, the opening is just a bit bigger than on this side. Now the clue is that the smaller side has this little extra notch of plastic. Yeah, you can see it just reflecting there. So what we're going to do is we're going to be putting there's a pivot ball that pops into place inside that rod end. And it's this one right here. It's smooth inside, so that allows the screw that holds it in place on the suspension arm to slide on. And it just kind of, if you have a pair of pliers, I barely applied any force there. So you can see I'm holding it with the pliers, and that pivot just allows the rod end to basically just pivot freely. Okay, so that's all that needs. That is it for step 9. So as shown in the final picture, we've got the assembled tire and wheel. We've got the rest of the hardware pieces, which they say write 9 on the outside of that, which is fine, fair enough. This shock oil will most likely be filling all of your shocks, and of course we haven't put any oil in there yet. And don't need this for a little while, so we're just going to wipe the oil off the end and just set that aside in a safe place. So that's step 9 done. Now we're just going to get the bag for step 10, which is here, and we'll carry on with step 10. So just move all this aside and use our scissors, open up the bag, and we'll see what we've got. We've got 2 suspension arms. So we have a right and a left. One is in a bag, one is not. And I think I know the reason for that. And we've got a little bit of hardware here. Looks like we're going to be attaching the rear suspension arm. So let me just spread these out a little bit. So, got this, and you can basically just bend these off. If you have sturdy clippers, it's fairly soft plastic, so it does come off with a pair of good scissors. We're going to get these. There are the suspension pins I was telling you about as we were building the rear diff, and these will be going through these holes here. To fit and become part of the rear suspension. So it looks like the first thing we need to do is get the E-clips on here. Now be very careful with these. You don't have any spares, so keep your thumb over it, and you can see how use the ridges of the nose of the needle nose pliers. You can see how I'm just kind of holding my thumb over it just in case so it doesn't come flying off, because if it goes flying off you will not be able to find it. And make sure that you see how it's completely in place, including the little middle bit of the E. So we're going to put 1 E-clip on each of these hinge pins. They're called hinge pins because like on a door, there's a pin in the hinge, and the suspension arm is kind of like a door in that it swings on this hinge pin. Right, so we've got these 2 on there, and we're looking for the left, which, if you can just see the L there. So this is the left side here, which is where this arm is going to go. I think it's going to be that side. And this is the right side where the other arm is going to go, but we're not going to attach our... How are we going to attach it? I think we are going to attach it, yes, in this step. So the first thing we're going to do is inserting these from the back. So you can see how it goes through there, through the arm, and then through the front brace. It's a little bit difficult. Okay, had to give it just a couple taps just to make sure it got through there enough so that you can see where the hinge pin comes out, so that you can put the other E-clips on. So we're going to put this on and then get the other suspension arm out of the bag. Again, before you start squeezing, just keep your fingers carefully there. You do not want that to go flying off. Alright, so there's our first suspension arm in place. And that is definitely the left side. So let's get this other one out of the bag. Make sure that these the bits of the leftover plastic, that there's not too much left on there. So again, same thing. Just going to push it through, and this is where, to me, an RC car starts looking like an RC car. When you start getting the suspension pieces in place. Okay. Now here's where it's just flush now. And I'm just going to give it a couple of light taps with the pliers. There we go. And then once again, fingers on both sides, because if it does come rocketing off, it's not going to hurt, but you don't want to go looking through your carpet or your room or whatever, or your garage, for this single E-clip. There we go. See what I mean? Just going to get this. There are tools, specialist RC tools again, that you can use to put E-clips on and off, but normal hand tools work just fine as long as you know what you're doing. So the rest of step 10, now we've got that bag from step 9, which is this. Haven't put the 9 on it yet because I've only just done it. And we've got the shock pivots and some screw bits. I don't think we're going to be using these pieces just yet. So we'll put these in a little bag. So these are the pieces, the remaining pieces of the shock hardware. So let's see how these go on here. We've got this one goes through there. Very simple. And push it into the shock tower. I'm using the middle hole. Let's see if that's the correct one. Seems to be. It's a little bit hard to tell. And now we've got the nut that fits through from the other side. So let's get the correct size hex wrench. Let's see if this one fits. Yeah. So this is a 5.5. And you can see the wrench that came with one of the previous steps. That holds the nut perfectly. Now, whichever hole you put it through on one side, make sure you use the same hole on the other side. Otherwise, you'll have a slightly mismatched driving, steering on one side or the other. So let's just make sure we've done that all correct. Yep, they're on the back. And there we are. So that is step 10. Step 9, these pieces here. And the shock, which is not yet full of oil. But there we go. That's step 9. So, alright, well, that was a bit of a shorter one. Partly because we didn't show how to do all this, but again, that's in the second video, I believe, step 3. So, there we are. We hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been Frank from RC Racing TV, here with the DeAgostini Hummer H1 build. Come back next time, join us for the rest of the series.